I got all ready this morning. I put makeup on, I did my hair, I put a cute outfit on, totally intending to sit down and film this video then, and then life happened. Life with twins that are teething is unpredictable. It is insane sometimes, and we just spent the entire day basically just trying to keep babies happy. So one thing led to another, and now it is 7:37 at night. All three of my kids are in bed asleep, and I'm finally sitting down to do this. Hi, my name is Ariel. I am a mom of a 2.5-year-old girl named Dawson and 6-month-old boy-girl twins named Taryn and Everest. So when I was trying to figure out the best video to start this channel with, I thought that I would just start where I think most people are most curious, and that is everything to do with the twins. Let's start back at the beginning. Let me get a drink. Got, I think this one's strawberry bubbly? Or Bublé, if anyone's seen that commercial. I can't get Michael Bublé out of my head anytime I drink these. I got my mom bun in full force. Let's get into a story time. My husband Kale and I met 6 years ago. We've been together for 6 years. We've been married for 5 of those years. 5.5 of those years, actually. We had like a whirlwind romance, and we got engaged after 3 months of being together, and then we got married after we'd been together for 9 months, and 5 days after we got married, we went to our very first fertility appointment. Now, it was something that we knew the entire time leading up, that in order for us to have children, that we were going to require medical intervention, that we were going to need fertility treatments, that we were going to need some help in order to be able to get there. So that's a whole other different video in and of itself. For our first pregnancy with Dawson, we were married in 2015. I got pregnant in spring of 2017. The lead up into being able to get to the point where you can try to get pregnant using fertility treatments is quite hefty. There's a lot that you have to go through. You go through psychological evaluations, you go through multiple different doctors, there's lots of different tests, there's medications in some cases. So getting to that point it took us some time, and then once I got pregnant with her, you know, we were able to kind of start back at the point that we were at. They don't make you do all of those tests and everything again. Once you get your cycle back, you're pretty much ready to go. You can go for it again. So we go to our first fertility appointment after having Dawson when she's about 6 months old, and we drag her along to the appointment with us, and everybody thinks that she's adorable, and the doctor's like, he asks me about breastfeeding and about my cycle, and at that point I had stopped breastfeeding a couple of weeks prior because I had gone back to work, and it was a lot easier for me mentally and physically. I was in a lot of pain throughout the day from, you know, having a job that was very demanding and not being able to step away to pump as often as I needed to keep my supply up for Dawson. So we made the decision that I would just stop breastfeeding and we would just give her formula. But when we saw the doctor for the first time, I hadn't gotten my cycle back. So he basically told us, you've got to wait until you get it back, have 1 or 2 periods before you come back to just kind of make sure it regulates back out, and then we can start working on treatments. So we did that, and then when the time came to start trying, I was like, you know what, this is it. Last time I took 2 tries, but this time I'm gonna get this the first try. Almost like I viewed it as something that you had to be competitive about. That was absolutely not what ended up happening. The first try, it didn't work. I was doing it unmedicated at that time, so we were following my cycle, and then the only medical intervention that I was having apart from the actual treatment, which was an IUI, was I was having a trigger shot done when my eggs were ready to ovulate. And what that does is it makes the timing of the IUI with your ovulation line up a little bit better rather than just guessing. We were at a new clinic, and their procedure was that I was getting ultrasounds, and they were monitoring the growth of my eggs, and monitoring the 1 or 2 that were developing and maturing, and then when they were at a certain measurement, then I would be given a trigger shot, and that would force my egg to ovulate, and the following day we would do the IUI. So that's like the ideal situation for trying to get pregnant. It ups your chances. You're spending a lot of money on these fertility treatments. You know, they want to make sure that you have the best chance at them working. So we did the first one. I was super positive, really excited, was like, yes, this is it, this is our time, and it didn't work. So then I was like, okay, well, it's okay. It took 2 times with Dawson. Maybe it'll take 2 times with this next baby. And we did it the second time, and that one didn't work either. And then we did it a 3rd time and a 4th time. And come the 4th time, my doctors were like, okay, this is about the time where we're going to start stepping in. We're going to add some medications. We're going to try to stimulate higher ovulation. There's a possibility you might ovulate 2 eggs. But what that's going to do is give us a chance to see if we can get you pregnant before we move on to talking about something like IVF. I started on medication. I was taking shots every other day to help stimulate my ovaries and help mature more eggs. And the 5th time, there were 2 eggs that could have ovulated at one time, but one of them was a lot smaller than the first one. So the general consensus was that I likely only ovulated 1 egg, and that time didn't work. And then the 5th time didn't work. When we went for the 6th try, I was in a really negative mindset. I was at a point where I was like, this is just not gonna work, and it's not meant to happen, and I don't even know why we're trying, because I'm not gonna get pregnant. I haven't gotten pregnant in the last 6 months. I don't even know why I'm bothering. And then my husband, Kale, was like, you know, it's gonna work. It's gonna be okay. So when we went to the appointment for our 6th try, we said to the doctor right then, is there more that we can do? Is there more medication that we can take? Can we increase the dosage? Because at that point, there's nothing medically holding my body back from getting pregnant naturally, apart from obviously needing to do the intrauterine insemination. So up until that point, I had only been given like the lowest dose possible of IVF medication. So just enough essentially to, you know, stimulate 1 really good egg, possibly a 2nd egg if my body was feeling it, but that even wasn't guaranteed. We went to our next appointment, we talked to our doctor, and we were like, is there any way that we can increase this? Can we talk about what'll happen if we add more medication into this mix so that we increase the chances of it working, because we're running out of money, we're running out of vials of sperm, and we really, at this point, we want to try everything that we can to get me pregnant. That was when our doctor sat us down and we're like, absolutely. We can take this to the next level if that's something that you're interested in, but you need to understand that you will ovulate 2 eggs, and there is a chance that you could become pregnant with twins. He said that it was a 2% chance that I could end up pregnant with twins, but because up until this point it hadn't really worked, he wasn't too concerned about it. So we were feeling really good about that. We increased the medication, I did all of the shots, and then, you know, my eggs were ready to go, and I did that final ultrasound before my trigger shot, and he was like, you have 2 eggs that are basically the exact same size. When we do this trigger shot, they are both going to ovulate. So just so you know, before we do this again, there's that 2% chance that both of these eggs will implant and you will have twins. And we were like, okay. Like, at this point, I think with it not working for so long, I was very like, yeah, there's 2 eggs, but the chances of having both of them implant is like slim to none. So I was like, yep, let's do it up. Let's do that trigger shot. Let's figure it out. And then at least I have double the chances of just 1 egg sticking in my uterus. So we did the trigger shot. I went back the next day. We did the IUI. And then you wait a certain period of time before your test date. And I've always been the most impatient person when it comes to a test date, and that's really, really tough when you're doing fertility, because if you don't wait until your test date, even if it's positive, your HCG levels, which is the hormone that indicates that you're pregnant, are so low that a pregnancy test might not even pick it up. So being the impatient person that I am, started taking tests like 4 or 5 days before my actual test date, which is still way too early, because the test date that they give you is technically like the very first day that you might have a positive pregnancy test. And even at that point, sometimes people who are pregnant don't test positive on those days because it's so early. So I tested and it was negative, and I was like, of course this didn't work again, and I was super bummed. And then the next day I was feeling so sick, and I was kind of like, it could be, but it's probably not, because I had a negative test, even though, like I said, I was way before my test date, so I was being totally irrational at that point anyways. But I was like, I don't know, like it could be, I probably just have some kind of like stomach flu or bug or something like that, and whatever. I didn't even really think twice about it. I went to work, sucked it up, made it through the day, and then I came home that night and I was exhausted, like so tired. I passed out on the couch, which isn't something that I normally do, especially having a toddler around the house now, because I'm very like acutely aware of like what she's doing and where she is at all times. And then we also have a dog, so between the two of them, sleeping on the couch is not a thing. And I sat down on the couch, I wasn't even laying down on the couch, and I fell asleep. And that was kind of the first indication where even Kale was like, that was pretty unusual. So a couple days went by, it's now my test date, I still don't have my period, so I was like, you know what, I'll just take a test. It was a clear blue pregnancy test, not one that's digital, but it was one that has like the positive where you wait for the line. Normally the way that those tests work is you pee on the end of the stick, you watch the whole thing get wet, and then you normally have to sit and wait for like up to 2 minutes for it to measure your HCG levels and give you a result on the test. And I kid you not, it hadn't even fully finished absorbing, and as it passed over where that line was, it was like a dark blue line right there. And instantly I was like, oh my god, I am pregnant. Like, this did work. After that I got that positive pregnancy test, my symptoms came on full force. I was ill, not to the point where I was throwing up, but to the point where like I was disgusted at the smell of my kitchen. I couldn't stand the refrigerator. It just smelled awful, and I was so exhausted. And then about 2 weeks after I got that positive pregnancy test, so doing fertility, once I got my positive test, I had to call my doctor. We booked an appointment for an ultrasound, but that ultrasound was going to be at my 6-week mark, so I still had to wait another couple of weeks before I could go in. And I'd say about halfway through that point, I started to notice that my jeans were really, really tight. And then a few more days went by and I couldn't even do them up anymore. If I did them up, I was in pain. And I was kind of like, okay, well, like I know you're supposed to get big the second time around a lot faster, but it felt like it was way too fast for how early I was in the pregnancy. Kale and I kind of started to joke about maybe it's twins. Maybe you're pregnant with 2. And I was like, no, there is no way that both implanted. Up until this point, we weren't even getting 1. So the fact that I'm pregnant at all, let's just count our blessings for the 1 baby that we have. And it's probably just because it's my second pregnancy. All my muscles are loose, my skin is loose, and everything's starting to kind of grow and be noticeable a lot faster. And that was kind of where we left it. We left it at like, it was a joke. Our ultrasound date comes around. So we make the drive to Montreal. We have our toddler in tow. She's a 1.5 years old. And we get to our appointment and we go into the ultrasound room, and there are these like dark, you know, very serene, very private rooms. They've got very gentle music playing, and the nurse asked me to get ready. So it's a vaginal ultrasound. So I take off my pants and my underwear and I lay down on the table. I cover myself up. Our toddler is kind of running a little rampant. We just spent a couple hours driving in the car, so she had a bit of energy to kill. And our doctor comes into the room and he says, first of all, congratulations on your positive pregnancy test. And we're like, yes, thank goodness, it finally worked. And we're so happy that it worked. And he asks me, how are you feeling? And I was like, I have been so sick. I was like, before I leave here today, if I can please get a prescription for something that is going to help me with this nausea, I feel like I can't function. Like, it's worse than it was with my first pregnancy. At that point, I was like barely eating anything. And I was like, I need something. So when we're done with all of this, please remind me that I need to get a prescription, because I was like, I can't function like this. And as he was prepping everything, I told him this, and he made this comment, and he was like, oh, maybe it's twins. And it was just kind of like, it was an offhand comment. It kind of just rolled off his shoulder. And I was like, oh, can you imagine? Is literally what I remember saying. We all kind of just like had a little bit of a chuckle. Kale was still trying to wrangle Dawson. And I lay up, I put my legs up in the stirrups, and he goes in for the ultrasound. And as soon as he puts that in, we all see 2 sacs across the screen. Kale kind of stops paying attention to Dawson for a second, and he's staring at the ultrasound screen, and I'm laying there looking at it, kind of watching what's happening with our daughter, because she's running a little bit crazy, wondering if I just imagined what I just saw. Did I really just see 2 sacks on the screen? Is that really what there's no way. There's no way. This is everything that's going through my mind. In about the 15 seconds that it takes for the doctor to chuckle and say, "Did you guys see what I just saw?" We all started to laugh. There was nothing else to do. I was like, there is no way. And he was like, there is a way. There are 2 babies in there. And so he went digging for some heartbeats. We were able to get the heartbeats. They had nice strong heartbeats at 6 weeks old. And I was in shock. I could not believe that both of my eggs had worked. This was our last vial of sperm that we had available. It was our last chance. It was our last chance to get pregnant at that point in our lives, and we're blessed with 2. And so we finished our ultrasound. We got some photos, and then we had to meet him in his office because we were now a multiple pregnancy. So I got redressed and I turned to Kale and I was like, "Oh my god, we're having twins?" And he was like, "Holy shit, we're having twins." And then we walked down the hallway to his office and we sat in there, and he was like, he went through the serious things that a doctor has to tell you when you just find out that you're expecting more than 1 baby. We could lose a twin. He walked us through the risks of having a multiple pregnancy, and then he gave us a referral and we went on our merry way, pregnant, expecting twins. We are having 2 babies. There's no way that we are so lucky that we get to have these 2 babies. And I think initially there was shock, and we felt so incredibly lucky that we were going to be expecting 2. And then by the time we were driving home a couple hours later, I think like the overwhelming sense of like, oh my god, now we need doubles of everything. We thought we were already ready, but now it's basically like we're starting from scratch. We have to add doubles of all of these important things that we already had from Dawson. And that was pretty much how those first few weeks went. I made appointments with my regular doctor. I did blood pressure tests. I had to do all of my blood work. All of my screening came back normal. Having twins, you have a ton more ultrasounds. You have to go to a lot of specialists. And for the most part, I would say my pregnancy was pretty normal. All my tests came back and they were totally fine. It was pretty smooth sailing up until we got to about the 24-week mark. I had an ultrasound and it did show that one of the babies had high fluids. So then I had to do ultrasounds every 2 weeks until we saw that the fluid had kind of resolved itself, and it ended up doing that. So I was really happy. I was really grateful. And throughout the entire pregnancy leading up to 28 weeks, I had been told to prepare for the possibility that I could have very premature babies. And I think that's something that you kind of prepare for anyways when you find out that you're having multiple. So a lot of women don't even make it to 40 weeks with just a single baby. So making it to 40 weeks with more than 1 baby, where the room runs out a lot faster, it's not something that happens. People don't go to 40 weeks when they're pregnant with twins normally. When I hit 28 weeks, I was still working at the time, working a retail job. I was on my feet for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I was in a lot of pain physically. I was huge. At that time, I was already measuring about 38 weeks pregnant, and I was only 28 weeks. My belly was huge. My babies were on track and growing normally, but I knew that space was running out very quickly in my stomach. I was in a lot of back pain and hip pain. It was very difficult for me to be on my feet. So at 28 weeks, that was like the beginning of when you could take your maternity leave. At least here in Canada, that's how that works. So at 29 weeks, I did go on mat leave. I went early so that I could just rest. I was exhausted at this point. Once I went on mat leave, we were kind of just in a waiting game. Like, I had been told up until this point to expect the babies to come early. Every week that went by that they weren't here, I was grateful that they were staying in there and growing more and more, but I was also kind of annoyed because I had prepared myself mentally to meet them already, and that I wouldn't make it to my due date, and I probably wouldn't even make it to December. So my original due date was December 31st. The weeks went by, I had follow-up ultrasounds, everything was still looking great, babies were still growing normally. So I had a conversation with my OBGYN and was like, look, how long are we gonna leave these babies in for? Because if they don't come on their own, what's kind of the procedure then? And he basically explained that as long as I didn't go into labor prior, He was comfortable with me being pregnant up until at least 38 weeks, granted that nothing changed on my ultrasounds. So that would mean that babies would have to stay on their growth curve, my fluid levels would have to stay down. There had to be no change when it came to anything that could be an indicator for preeclampsia, no change in heart, like my blood pressure, in the baby's heart rates, in anything like that. All of the stuff that they were monitoring me for had to pretty much stay even keel in order for me to stay pregnant up until 38 weeks. So I was like, okay. And he was like, you know, they might come early. After we hit 32 weeks, he was like, at this point, they might need some help learning how to breathe. If they come, they might spend a little bit of time in the NICU, but the chances of them having an extended NICU stay at that point was slim to none. He's like, it might be a couple of weeks at most. And then every week that goes by, your babies are more and more developed, so the chances of them having to spend time in the hospital when they're born reduces by a lot. So every week that I was still pregnant, we kind of made jokes where I would be like, I'm 34 weeks pregnant and they're still in there and they're never gonna come, and I'm 35 and now I'm 36 weeks pregnant. 36 weeks and 4 days, I have an ultrasound. We're gonna do all of the measurements for the babies. We're gonna make sure that everything is still going okay. We'll check my fluid levels. And it was a really, really long ultrasound. It was like an hour and a half long ultrasound, which was a long time. It was a lot, but they had to measure everything. And with the babies being as big as they were, it was very difficult for her to get all of the measurements that she needed. Overall, it went really well. We got to see the babies moving inside. My husband had to work that day, so I had our toddler Dawson, and I actually brought my brother with me so that he could help me watch her. She wasn't allowed while they were doing the ultrasound, but then afterwards, him and her got to come into the room and take a look at the babies. And you know, while I'm sure that my 2-year-old didn't care at all, my brother actually thought it was kind of cool. So I had that ultrasound, and the following day I had an appointment scheduled with my OB. And I get there and I go in and he asks me how I'm feeling and he measures my belly. At this point, I'm measuring almost 50 weeks pregnant. My belly is massive. And he says, okay, so we noticed some things on your ultrasound. He was like, it's not my area of expertise, but there are things that I would like to get a second opinion on. At this point, I was kind of concerned. I was like, what do you mean? Like, you need a second opinion on this? And he's like, well, one of the babies has dropped off of their growth curve. So what that means is that baby from the last ultrasound that I had up until the one I'd had the day before hadn't grown at the same rate between those couple of weeks as she had been before. So something was stunting her growth in the womb. She totally dropped off her curve. And he was like, I mean, it could be nothing. It's not my area of expertise. I would like your permission to reach out to a colleague and ask for a second opinion. And I was like, absolutely. My worry starts to set in. Like, have I carried these babies this long and now we're gonna have complications? And I was like, you know what? You do what you gotta do. And he was like, okay, let me have a day or two and I will consult with my colleague and then I will call you back and we'll let you know what's gonna happen. And so the next day, late in the evening, I got a call from his secretary asking me to come in for another appointment. Again, my husband had to work. We were saving all of his days off for when the twins would be here. So I went to this OB appointment with Dawson in tow. I was by myself, so I brought her some things to color with. I brought her a snack, and I sat her in the chair while he did his measurements, and then he said, so I talked to my colleague, and we're going to induce you tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, yeah, it's a little concerning that she's dropped off her growth curve. At this point, the babies are viable. They are fully grown. They will be okay, but we can't really tell on the ultrasound because everything is so crammed inside why she's dropped off her growth curve. If there is a reason, we want to have her out here so that we can examine her and make sure that she's okay. So at that point, I was very like, you know, it was the day I'd been waiting for the entire pregnancy and it was finally here. And I was like, holy shit, we're doing this. Okay. So we left the appointment. I called my husband when I got back into the truck and I was like, you need to tell your work that you will not be in tomorrow because we will be having babies. I called everyone that, you know, was a part of this birth plan. So I had to call my mom. She was taking the next 2 weeks off because she was taking care of Dawson and walking the dog. And I started setting everything up. I made sure that everything was lined up. I went home. I double checked what was in my bag. I was told that I would get a call from the hospital. They would let me know when I could go for the induction, and so I just was waiting for the call. I spent the whole day waiting for the call, and it didn't end up coming that day. It came the following morning at 8 a.m. I called my mom and had her come over. About an hour and a half after that, we headed to the hospital. Once we got to the hospital, it was about 12 o'clock. I was put through admitting. I was the only one having twins there at that time. You get a little bit more attention than the average person. There were constantly nurses coming and going. I had ultrasound techs wheel their, screens up into my room. Once a room was available in delivery, I was transferred. They just had me get into a wheelchair and they walked me over into the delivery room out of admitting. And once I was in there, I was hooked up to IVs and they started my Pitocin. So that was kind of the first point where we were like, okay, this is happening. We walk into this room and the room is huge. It's the biggest delivery room I have ever seen. It's got, there's a bathroom in one corner. There's a chair, like a love seat couch thing that turns into a bed in the other corner for your partner, your support person. There was an actual office desk sitting there, and there were two of the baby warmers in the corner, and that was really when it hit me that we're about to have two babies. This is really intense. I got really emotional when I saw those and I started to cry, and I was already kind of emotional because we were going to have babies. And then there was a gray door sitting right there. We got our nurse that was going to be with us for the first period of time. She came in, she started the drip, and that desk is actually there because they do not leave you alone in the room the entire time through your induction with multiples. I don't know if that's the case with others because I wasn't induced with Dawson, but we had 24/7, someone was sitting there in the room for anything that we needed and constantly monitoring the babies. And she kind of walked through everything that was in the room. She was like, you can use the bathroom if you want, you can get up and walk around, you can do what you want to do until things start to pick up. I asked her about this gray door that was on this one wall, and she was like, I'm gonna be honest with you, that's the scary room. And I was a little confused by why she was calling it the scary room. I didn't really understand. I was also having really awful contractions while she was telling me all of this. That is the room that we will take your babies into if they come out and there is a problem. If they need surgery, if they're not breathing, that is where they will go. Okay. I took it all in. I was like, I fully understand. And then she left the room to go get a paperwork fill out. And I turned to Kale and I was like, so the goal is that we don't go through that door. I don't want the babies going anywhere. So by this point, it was about 6 o'clock. I had been on the Pitocin drip. I've been having some contractions here and there. A couple members of Kale's family came in to just say hi and wish us luck. The majority of his family are nurses or paramedics, so they ended up being at the hospital. They came by before they left and brought Kale a coffee and, basically said, good luck, we'll see you on the other side. By about 6 o'clock, my contractions were strong enough that I was in a lot of pain. So I asked my nurse if it would be possible to get the epidural at this point. She said yes. I would like to say that I'm one of those strong women who doesn't need any medication, but I didn't feel the need to torture myself this time around. Once he gave me the epidural, right after that, it kicked in. He kind of taped all of the tubes to my body. It kicked in. I was feeling really good. I was only about 4 or 5 centimeters dilated at this time, and I've been in labor for a few hours now on the Pitocin, which is supposed to induce labor and kind of get your body going. The nurse suggested that I try taking a nap while I was still, barely dilated. They don't check for dilation if it's not necessary. So when I was given the epidural, I was checked. And then after that, you kind of have to either be in the middle of pushing out a baby or you have to request it. She brought me a birthing peanut ball and suggested that I lay on my side and I put that between my legs and I have a nap. And what she said is that can help open up the cervix because I wasn't in any pain anymore because of the epidural and I was numb. She was like, you can totally just chill and let this kind of run its course and we'll check you in a few hours. And then Kale and I had a nap. He slept on his little love seat bed couch thing, and I slept in the bed with that peanut between my legs, and the nurse sat at her station for the next couple of hours. And the next thing that I remember, I woke up because of a contraction. I had a moment where I was in so much pain from the contraction that I was feeling that I couldn't breathe. And the nurse hadn't even realized that I had woken up. This contraction hit, and I held my breath through it. I had tears streaming down my face, and when it finally subsided, I turned to the nurse, I rolled over, and she was like, oh, how are you feeling? And I was like, my epidural's not working. And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, that was a contraction that just woke me up. She was like, okay, well, it's been a few hours. It's okay. At this point, it was probably about like 9:30-ish. I'm gonna be honest, from this point out, it's a little bit of a blur. I don't remember exactly what time it was. I just know that it was about 9:30-ish. Kale was still asleep in the chair beside me, and I was like, it's not working. And she was like, okay, well, it's been a few hours. We could probably give you a top up. Let's do that and let's see how it goes. And I was like, okay. So I felt a little bit of panic for a moment, but then it subsided. And I took the top up of the epidural, and it took the edge off of the contractions a little bit, but what I was feeling was I was totally numb up until my hips, and then I was numb in my legs, and my left hip, I was feeling every contraction, and I was kind of like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, I had read stories of people having failed epidurals, or people having their epidurals put in wrong and it only numbs one half of their body, and I was kind of starting to panic a little because I was like, there is no way I am birthing these twins and doing it without medication. I cannot feel this through 2 births. Panic was kind of starting to set in. The top up of my epidural kind of took the edge off a little bit, but I was still feeling a lot of pain, so I was letting my nurse know every time the contractions came, and she was monitoring them on the screen. She's like, yeah, that's a really big contraction, but you shouldn't be able to feel it as much as you do. She was like, I'm gonna get the OB back in here, and we'll get the anesthesiologist. Maybe we need to make an adjustment to your epidural line. We'll just get some experts in here and we'll figure it out. The anesthesiologist came, he checks everything, he checks my legs. He's like, it doesn't make any sense. She's fully numb everywhere except in her hips. So he actually calls for another anesthesiologist to come in, and they start discussing what could have gone wrong. They're standing there beside the bed. I'm feeling every one of these major contractions. We're still waiting for my OB. The anesthesiologist and his partner that he brought in, and then my nurse are standing at the side of the bed. You know, through the contractions, I'm listening to them discuss. Maybe it went in and we like overnumbed one of the sides. Maybe there's something wrong with the actual medication amounts. They both double checked all of my medication multiple times, and I'm laying there just like praying that at some point this is gonna kick in. And I'm just like, please do not make me give birth unmedicated. At this point, Kale is also awake. He's standing beside me. The look on his face is he's concerned. He can see how much pain I'm in, but he's trying to just kind of tell me it's gonna be okay. We're gonna figure it out. By the time like everybody got there, it was about 11 o'clock at night. We'd been trying to manage the pain up until that point, and at about 10 after 11, my OB comes into the room, and as she walks into the room, I vividly remember the nurse saying, maybe the baby is blocking a nerve. Like, it made sense when I heard it, but at that point I'd been in pain for so long, and I was just trying to focus on my breathing. The contractions were one right on top of the other. I felt like I couldn't even catch my breath in between them. When she said maybe the baby is blocking a nerve, I heard the voice of my OB be like, okay, Ariel, we're gonna check you, and we're gonna see how far along you are. We're gonna see what's going on here because you're clearly in a lot of pain. And so they help me get my legs up into the stirrup. We pull back the blanket. She hasn't even put her hands on me, and she says, the baby's right there. My mind kind of starts to race. Kale is holding my hand. I turn to him and I'm like, I'm so scared. And he was like, it's gonna be okay. I took a deep breath, and my OB was like, you need to push. Your baby's head is right there. So Kale kind of came around and he was like, she's serious, like the baby's head is right there. Because up until this point, it's not procedure for them to check your dilation, and I hadn't dilated very far up until that point, you know, and I'd fallen asleep and I was only at a 4. All I remember is a blur of people came out of, obviously they all just came through the one door, but it felt like they came out of every wall in this place, and in the span of 10 seconds, there were probably 25 people that were in the room. Each of the babies had their own NICU team of about 5 to 6 people that were waiting and ready over by their newborn warmers. I had my ultrasound tech from earlier came in. She was still on duty. My nurse was right there, and 2 other nurses joined. We had students. The hospital that I was giving birth in was a teaching hospital, and I had consented to having students present while I gave birth. You have to learn somehow. There were people everywhere, and I held Kale's hand and I held my nurse's hand, and 2 other nurses were down, and Kale had one of my legs and the nurse had the other leg. My OB sat right there and I pushed, and at 11:17, so 7 minutes after this happened, it was 3 pushes and our first baby came out, our son Taryn. And when he came out, they lifted him up, they delayed cord clamping for 60 seconds to allow as much blood as possible to pump back into the baby before they clipped the umbilical cord. So they held him there, and I was watching him and he's moving all around, and I was elated. And something I guess that I hadn't mentioned before is both of my babies going into this were head down, and that's ideal for a vaginal birth. So I had also been made aware of the fact though that there was a possibility that when baby A, who was our son Taryn, came out, there was a chance that baby B, our daughter Everest, was going to flip and become breech. That doesn't mean that she can't be delivered vaginally after that, but there's an increase of complications or risk of complications if that happens. So Taryn came out, he's beautiful, and I'm focusing on the fact that, you know, he's wonderful and he's there, and Kale finally cuts the cord, and they don't put him on me right away with him being a twin. They take him right over to his baby warmer, they wipe him off, they're checking his vitals, and I'm listening a little bit, but I'm very acutely aware of the fact that my heartbeat monitors for the twins have gone silent. And so is my nurse. She is beside me. She's got one of my monitors that was strapped to my stomach, and she's frantically moving it around my stomach. The ultrasound tech that was working for our case stuck her hand in with the ultrasound wand, and she was like, your baby's flipped, she's breech. At that point, I kind of started to panic a little bit. Her water needed to be manually broken. The only water that I had broken up until that point was baby A's, which was Taryn's. So my doctor reached up and she broke Evie's water, and because we lost her heartbeat and weren't able to find it, and because she was also the concerning twin, she was the smaller one, she was the one who dropped off of her growth curve, they were not waiting for her to come out with my contractions. They waited until I had another contraction, and then my nurse stuck her hand up there and she grabbed Evie's legs and she literally pulled her into this world. I vividly remember she was pulling so hard that my butt was sliding off of the bed. I had to hold on to the side rails. I had a nurse holding me. I had Kale holding me on this side, and we had to hold me in place while this nurse pulled my baby out of my body. And when they pulled her out, she was silent. And I had a moment where I panicked, and I'm gonna get emotional just talking about it. I had a moment where I was like, this can't be happening. She was not as pink as her brother was. She was very small comparatively, at least like in that glance of like, you know, panicky, teary eyes that I had in looking at her. She looked small. She was kind of blue. And I was like, this can't be happening. So they clamped, and Kale cut her cord, and they took her over to the other side of the room, and they're kind of like, they're tending to me now, and they bring me back Taryn as Evie goes off into the other room, and I'm having such a hard time even just focusing on the baby that they've put onto my chest, because all I can think about is my baby that's on the other side of the room that I haven't heard cry yet. And Kale went with her. I have honestly no idea what happened over there apart from what he's told me, and it was that she was not breathing, that they had to put suction all the way down her throat, empty out her lungs, and then she finally cried out, and I started to cry. I had Taryn on my chest. They didn't even wipe Evie off. They brought her right back to me when she started breathing, and Kale came by, and we just laid there and we just cried. And it was the most incredible moment, but it was the most terrifying moment of my life. And at some point in and amongst all of that, I came to enough and kind of snapped out of my shock and my panic enough to ask the doctors how I was. Because with my first birth, I'd had hemorrhaging and bleeding, and it took hours and so many stitches the doctor lost count, and like I almost to a point where I needed a transfusion. So, you know, going into this birth, I was really scared that there were going to be the same kind of complications, and I asked her how I was, and she was like, you're fine, you didn't even tear. I was like, what? I just gave birth to 2 babies and I didn't even tear? And she's like, yeah, you don't even need stitches, you're fine. Don't even worry about it, just focus on the babies. That was our birth story of welcoming our beautiful twins into this world. We had a little bit of a rough go after that. I can kind of do a whole other video all about those first 24 hours or those first few weeks with the newborns, but I mean, having the twins has been the most incredible experience of our lives. I've never felt so lucky to have these beautiful babies, and it's had its challenges for sure, but they've completed our family. So if you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you would give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below if you'd like to see any other kind of videos like this. I have a few more video ideas in mind. I can do any kind of videos that you'd like, so just let me know in the comments down below. And if you'd subscribe, I would be super thankful. It would mean the world to me to be able to hang out with you guys every single time that I get to upload one of these videos. So I hope that you enjoyed this conception and pregnancy and birth story for the twins. I'm sorry it's a bit of a hefty one. I can't wait to talk to you guys in the next video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.